I was programmed to protect you. And now, we start again.
It's Mike and Dave with you here once again with another video discussion of a sci-fi show that's out there, Raised by Wolves on HBO Max. And it's a question as to whether or not this is going to grab people's attention from this streaming service that not everyone has in their household. But we're giving it a try to see if people grab onto this, and we really enjoyed it. It's actually quite a unique exploration of the AI topic that is really one of our favorite topics to discuss aside from time travel.
Right. And, you know, with us changing to a premiere finale format, it makes things a little different for us. We certainly miss doing the in-between episodes. As you said, it's on HBO Max, which everybody doesn't have, but there have been plenty of shows on HBO that have drawn a huge audience, not only watching the show, but then going on to podcasts that are associated with that. So hopefully, people will grab onto this, because I was pretty pleased with the first two episodes.
Right. And we are going to be discussing the first two episodes. HBO Max actually did premiere the first three episodes of Raised by Wolves on September 3rd, but we're only going to be going into the first two. So spoiler warning for those of you who have not seen the first two, we are going to be talking about both of those. However, it is going to be airing weekly after that, every Thursday. So you could have an ongoing water cooler discussion if you chose to. But those of you who know Dave and I's podcast, Sci-Fi Fidelity, which we ran for Den of Geek, this is kind of mimicking that same format. We often on that podcast would discuss the first couple of episodes of a new show. The difference here is that we also want to maybe tackle the finale if people are interested. So if you are watching Raised by Wolves and you enjoy our premiere discussion today, please let us know in the comments below so that we can go ahead and add a finale discussion as well, because we want to make sure it's worth discussing. I've seen the first three. I'm sure Dave has stuck to the first two as per our discussion, but we're not sure what's going to happen with this series. And if you do enjoy the show, please let us know and we'll continue discussing it.
Right. And I know you love that format of dropping three and then going to the week by week. And I love it as well. It's the best of both worlds.
I used to call it the Hulu method because Hulu was the first one to start doing that. And I like that these new streaming services, Apple TV Plus does that as well. So I like that that's becoming a trend because I prefer it to the binge watching model.
Oh, no question. Especially as reviewers, it makes our lives much, much easier.
But it's interesting that it is weekly because this was originally slated to be a TNT show, but Warner Brothers decided to move it to HBO Max to boost the new streaming service and the library that it provided. And I think that was a good move. Certainly other shows have been moving to HBO Max too from other Warner Brothers properties. So that's probably a good move. And I think HBO Max will pick up an audience. This actually also has the draw of being directed, at least the first two episodes, by Ridley Scott.
Dude, come on. Yeah.
I mean,
really?
Sci-fi royalty right there.
Oh. Yeah.
Because, and if you think about it, when you're watching this show, it really does feel like Alien. And I'm not just speaking because of the androids having white blood, although that certainly was evocative of the Alien movies, but also, of course, The Martian and Gladiator and a lot of other movies that he sort of has that same feel as this series, even though he's known for film directing. So he's also executive producing in addition to directing these first two.
So is it fair if we start bringing in other AI shows and making comparisons? Because certainly it's evocative of humans, even Dark Matter with Android.
Yeah. And well, in fact, the actor playing Father in this one, the android known as Father, reminded me a lot of the androids in Humans. So it might be just the British accent, but
Well, and we've come a
nonetheless.
long way from Data, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And so if you've tuned in, of course, I did give the spoiler warning at the beginning, so most of you probably know this already, but the log line for this series reads, Raised by Wolves centers on two androids tasked with raising human children on a mysterious virgin planet. As the burgeoning colony of humans threatens to be torn apart by religious differences, the androids learn that controlling the beliefs of humans is a treacherous and difficult task. And I think that did a great job of encapsulating these first two episodes. There was nothing spoilery in that. But it does set up the idea that, who are we supposed to trust? Are we supposed to trust the androids, the humans? Is this going to be like a, Skynet setup, or, how's it going to run? And there were some Skynet aspects to it, but I think in the end, it was the humans that destroyed themselves this time.
Well, right.
Earth.
And I think what the show did such a good job with is unfolding the mysteries a little bit at a time, because, well, why are these two androids, mother and father? And at first, we're not sure they're androids, but again, that comes pretty clear pretty quickly. What's the deal with them, raising these 6 children? And again, that comes out pretty quickly as well. And we've seen this thematic idea before. The human race has destroyed itself and has to, rebuild. So whether it's Battlestar Galactica, where the 50,000, I forget what the number is now, 50,000 people that survived just happened to be on space stations when the Cylons destroyed the Earth, or is there an arc the way we have here?
Yeah, exactly. And I do think that we're dealing with a very limited human population as we get into episode 2. So we'll talk about that when it arrives. But basically, yeah, we're not given too much. Even the trailers were very light on detail, which is a rare and good thing these days.
Oh.
And they arrive on a Kepler 22b, which is, we talk about the Kepler planets being Earth-like and having atmospheres that we can breathe. But it's said to be the only known inhabitable planet in the vicinity, which is supposed to, I guess, explain why these warring factions both happen to choose the same one. It's kind of dry, desert-like, peppered with holes, mysterious holes that obviously maybe some creature that lives there in tunnels under the earth. We're not sure at first. And we're not also sure about the method of travel, because in the opening credits, it looks like there's some kind of wormhole showing the ship arriving. But we also hear of the Mithraic ship taking 13 years to arrive. And because they, had humans on board, they had to take the slow way, whereas the androids with their unborn fetuses could go much faster without any damage. So I think that was a cool setup, because it gave them a good head start and allowed the kids to grow up and experience some difficulties before we introduced another conflict.
Or let the kid grow up.
Yeah, the one kid.
The one kid.
Unfortunately, yeah. Well, but also it's interesting because we didn't get any kind of exposition or narration or voiceover, God forbid. We just had mother and father crash on the planet, trying to establish their shelter, and they initiate the pregnancy. And we're just supposed to figure it out, what they're doing with the little wires connected to her abdomen.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that all good AI shows do is explore that relationship between the AI and the human, and whether there's an actual relationship that forms, for instance, in humans. We even see that here, certainly from a different aspect. Here it's the parent-child, but Campion loves his parents. I mean, he understands their foibles, but it's clear he loves them. And then the question becomes, do the androids love him back?
Right, because that's set up quite early, that it's not pure robotic behavior from them. Because as the babies are born, Campion, the 6th baby to be born, there's 6 total, isn't breathing. And the method by which mother revives him is kind of strange, and a little bit makes us question, how is this android programmed to express things? Because there's a tear that falls out and there's singing involved to bring him about. Now, of course, it could have just been the closeness and the encouragement and a passage of time that allowed Campion to start breathing on his own. But it's a very, very motherly act that she performs there to sort of revive him and bring him into the world, naming him after their AI creator, apparently.
Right. And the other thing that I'm fascinated with in terms of the development of the AI relationships with Campion is the level of deceit that the AI are capable of. Now, we could argue, well, that was programmed in, or perhaps they learned along the way the value of deceit or little white lies, but it's still fascinating.
Yeah, you have to wonder where the programming comes in, because as we learned during the first couple of episodes, these androids are not necessarily what they at first seem. I think Father is an android that is built for child rearing, and Mother is very much not. Oh. She's kind of been repurposed.
Right, and we get that classic, perhaps even quintessential, don't tell your mother. This is just between the two of us. And
right, and they also have programming that is a little bit prejudicial towards the other faction on Earth, because of course Earth was destroyed by two warring factions, religious in nature, one group of atheists and one Mithraics, which it sounds like they're trying to base it off of Mithras, which is an actual religion that Christianity sprung from, a sun-worshipping religion, basically, because they refer to God as Sol in this series. So I think it's interesting that they went that route, because you start to then wonder, should we be siding with the atheists? What are my personal beliefs? How does that play into the way I view this show? And, when we get into a prophecy surrounding Campion, it really starts to get where you're just like, what am I supposed to think? What am I supposed to believe?
Right. Well, back in the day, we sided with the polytheistic side of the war. So again, but like
that's
you
true.
said,
Battlestar Galactica played with it.
Yeah. So that's again one of those fascinating details that evolves, and the entire "don't let your mother know you're becoming a believer," so that Father accepts it perhaps as a part of Campion's emotional development, or
just survival instinct to allow him to get along with the Mithraics on the planet, because listen, this is the last remnants of humanity. Maybe we shouldn't be bringing our political baggage with us.
Right. And I was a little surprised that when the two groups finally confront each other, Mother is right up front. Nope, non-believer here.
Yeah, exactly. And tries to, gain their respect, but also clearly drawing those lines. And we have to assume that's part of her programming. So very much something that comes out as we learn more about her original programming. That makes much more sense. Whereas Father is, going to prioritize survival over any kind of, views on religion. But you mentioned the fact that a lot of these kids die, and one of them falls down a hole. So we'll chalk that up to an accident. But the others get this mysterious illness, and that does play out in the first 3 episodes. I won't spoil it for you, but it is something that keep an eye on that, because it isn't just, someone getting sick with pneumonia or whatever like that. So it's something that they're wondering, okay, why did this happen? Was it a failing of me as a mother? Maybe perhaps Mother blames herself a bit, because she does appear to be affected greatly. She even howls. I mean, they play with this wolves imagery quite a bit in this series, and not just with this one howling at the moon reaction to it.
Yeah, and I forget which one it is. I believe it's Father that even says, we'll get it right this time, realizing they failed.
No, I think that's Mother.
That's
yeah.
Mother. And of course, it comes on the heels of taking the 5 hostages, kidnapping them, whatever we want to call it. We'll get to that in a few minutes. But just that whole idea that, as you were implying, that the fact that they failed in their stated mission really gets to them. And again, is that programming, or is there a human element to these 2 androids, Mother and Father?
Yeah, I think we're definitely dealing with some sophisticated androids, and I don't think that there should be any fault placed at the writing aspect of giving them that ability, because you can actually put together a pretty cohesive picture of how mother acts versus father. But it's interesting because the premiere episode pretty much sets it up such that we're like, oh, it's Skynet. She's going crazy. She's breaking down. She's leaking fluids at one point. And I think by the end of episode 1, we're just like, mother's nuts. She's actually quite evil. And that's what this show is going to be about. But through episode 2, it all turns around again. So I think it's really well done. The fact that not only did we question ourselves throughout with regard to what we should believe about the religious aspect of the conflict, but also who are the bad guys, because the Mithraics are not, perfect by any stretch.
Well, right. And again, that's kind of a staple in a lot of good science fiction that,
yes,
we talked about that how many times with Continuum. By the end of the series, well, maybe Liberate are the good guys. And
exactly.
And Kira's one of the bad guys, at least initially. But what did you think about the Mithraics when they finally land and we get the confrontation between the two groups? I didn't do a lot of looking into who the actors are in this series, so I was a little surprised to see my boy Ragnar there. But
yeah, Travis Fimmel, I think, was one of the big billings that showed up when this show was being promoted. And yeah, seeing him in this role is really cool because, the Mithraics have these cool outfits that look very rugged, but not necessarily futuristic. They kind of look priestly. They got the bright red sun on the front, kind of a white that gets quite dirty, but it's, formal uniform kind of look. And yet they're also veterans of a huge war. So Travis Fimmel's look definitely fits as much with this as it did with Vikings.
Right. And there's a certain functionality to the uniforms as well, even though, as you said, they are that uniform look and there is sort of a religiosity to them. But yeah, it's going to take me a while. I'll probably end up calling him Ragnar before the end of the series. But again, that's one of the cool reveals that we get in the second episode when we learn his backstory.
Yeah.
And that was pretty darn cool.
Seems to be. Yes. So let's talk about the Mithraics a little bit during this whole discussion of the breaking down of Mother, because they do arrive and she has to put on a happy face. They've got 2 warriors, a cleric, and an android themselves. And I love the explanation they give. An electromagnetic field is preventing us from landing on the equator. So they want to settle here. And I love that because I've always thought that was very strange whenever you would see a sci-fi show where there's a whole planet available to you. And this happened in The Expanse. It's like, you've got this entire planet of Illis and you both decide to land in this one location. Seems a bit odd, but this equator thing, I think, is going to actually be something as the series goes along. Something about the equator and the temperate zone preventing them from landing there might actually give you a clue as to, what or who is inhabiting this planet. At least I'm hoping that's how it plays out. But in the meantime, they decide, Mother is not very good at pretending to be human, so they figure out her ruse quite easily. But that's where she just flips. We saw foreshadowing of her breaking down, and now we think she's totally lost it, as she not only takes out those in the camp, but then uses their lander to go up to the mothership and take them out as well. And what did you think of that? Because this sonic weapon is brutal. It's like she's almost godlike in her powers.
Well, and I wasn't exactly clear on whether or not she knew what powers she possessed, because certainly we see that she can alter her look, she can alter her voice. She's got the, like you said, the sonic boom power where she just basically melts people until they explode or whatever it is. I wasn't sure whether her eyes had something to do with that. Was there some kind of laser deal with those? But I got the sense she didn't know she could do all of that. And
yeah, totally.
And I loved everything she did. I especially love the fact that she learned on the fly with us, kind of along for the ride.
Yeah, because they had her dreaming of flying and she wasn't sure what it was about. And basically it was her latent programming, because you figure maybe the atheists who we learned did not win this war. The Mithraics won the war. They had to really quickly scramble to get these, progeny off into the new planet. And maybe they didn't have a whole lot of time to reprogram this necromancer, as we learned she's called by the Mithraics, in order to get her to be a caretaker and protector. Because just sending the children with father would not have been enough. They would have been quite vulnerable. But this necromancer, reprogrammed to have motherly instincts, obviously we can maybe use that as a explanation for why she broke down, because she had conflicting orders, conflicting programming that was causing this. And then her protective side comes out. And that's why I feel like it's really cool that episode 1 shows her to be like this psychopath almost. And then by episode 2, she's taking out her eyes and putting in the other android's eyes to make sure she doesn't, go nuts on her own kind, and, is able to still provide care for her children. So I think that was just a beautiful setup, and it makes sense given the context of the war.
So she's a tiger mom. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, I don't know that there's any colleges and universities for her to worry about these kids getting into, but yes.
But you talked about whether her reactions were the result of faulty programming or perhaps hasty programming. And I guess in retrospect, it certainly worked out to her advantage and to the advantage of the mission, because had she not been able to do that, I mean, we don't know what the Mithraics would have done once they took control, and they certainly would have taken control because they had the numbers. She just doesn't give them a chance to get that far.
Right. And in fact, the really cool aspect of that doubt comes out in Campion's behavior himself, because he doubts his mother and her motivations and whether or not she can be trusted. And I think it's very nice that they have this prophecy pop up during their initial visit where, this is strange. This is an orphan boy who, is on this strange planet. Perhaps it's this prophet who's going to discover the Mithraic mysteries that we've heard so much about in our own religious texts. And I think that's a interesting setup, because then it makes us wonder, should we be going with Campion's doubts? Because, maybe he's the chosen one. And it's this chosen one aspect of, it's a trope, obviously, in sci-fi. And we don't necessarily go in for that. We kind of say, here we go, chosen one. This is an interesting twist, because is he really? Or is that just what the Mithraics believe? Because you can't believe part of it and not all of it. Or can you? I don't know.
Well, and as we've said many times, a trope is a trope if the writers allow it to be. So I think it can really be something special, or it can just, be like any other trope. I'm going to give them a benefit of the doubt at this point. But the other thing that's so fascinating is once we get the other 5 children in the camp, now they've got to assimilate with mother, father, and Campion. And on the one hand, we really feel for Campion because, he's 1 against 5, even though this is his turf, his camp. But watching him try to be friends with these trying to help them out, and watching the other 5 have to actually work in the field, something that was totally alien to them. And I just really think that connection is special, because at the end of the day, what's the plan here? I keep forgetting to count. Do we have 3 males and 3 females? Because is the idea that as they get older, they pair up and procreate?
Well, I mean, that might have been the atheists' plan.
Okay.
I'm not sure. The Mithraics, of course, were probably going to establish more of a traditional colony, but who knows? Because, the whole thing that unfolds with Tempest is kind of both horrible, but also maybe speaks to some higher plan that was at play, at least in the mind of what was going on there. But I think it's interesting too that, we have the fact that the kids have arrived and Campion is trying to be their leader of a sort because of what he's seen Mother do. And I think that does have some credibility from the standpoint of she did take out Father's heart. She did deactivate him and then lie about it. She said he fell down one of the holes. So that was one of those things that, I'm not sure I could forgive it just because she sort of pulled it back in episode 2. So, and the fact that Campion brought up doubts about religion and, maybe prayer provides comfort. He does, sort of speak to that. And Father warns Mother that, every time he sees one of his siblings die, the original set of 6, it's pushing him closer and closer to belief.
And that's entirely natural and normal, certainly in our world.
Yeah. And so you can see where he's coming from, even though, he's also kind of trying to set himself up as a knowledgeable expert about this world, how the crops work and such that he can get along with these new folks, even though they are varied in age, unlike his original siblings who were all the same age. But let's take a little detour, Dave. We're going to talk a little bit about the Mithraics now, because you mentioned the fact that Caleb and Sue, who is this original couple that we actually follow, we only saw Caleb in episode 1, but we get to see his backstory and his companion as the war is ongoing on Earth before they leave. And I think this is cool because it gives you a little bit more of a context, which I think was very much needed, even though they had to take time away from the established mythology. And I did see some criticism in some of the reviews out there that why drop this chosen one aspect of things and then not address it for the first few episodes? Well, because they've got other things to do. And I think this backstory is very important, especially since Caleb and Sue are atheists, but obviously they kill the real Caleb and Sue. I'm not sure how they track them down, but it does work out for them, except for the fact that they find out that there's a son involved. And now they're going to have to be parents if they're going to get away with this. And I think it's really interesting how this plays out because Paul, as the kid is known, is not really used to having his parents be a presence in his life. So they probably could very easily get away with it. But what's kind of cool is that they do start to form a bond with Paul and want to be his parents. So I thought that was a really cool thing because the danger is actually in acting strangely. And if they had just kind of played it cool and not gotten close, they probably would have been better off.
Well, right. And that's what I thought was done well as well, in that when they first meet Paul, I half expected him to look at them, you're not my parents. But as you said, he's not used to having them around. They play it off very smoothly, as it turns out. And then, as you say, they develop that connection with him. And look, on the one hand, the jaded part of me says, well, they are forming that connection with him because he's a key to their survival in their new identities. But again, the fact that they are non-believers posing as believers eventually is going to come out. Are they going to confide in mother and father? Hey, we're on your side.
Yeah, and it also provides an interesting motivation that wouldn't have necessarily been there if they'd kept their ruse up in the more traditional sense, because Paul is among the captured children that's in this new camp. And let's talk a little bit about those kids, because we have Hunter, the oldest. He's the one that tells us that she's a necromancer that's been reprogrammed by the atheists. And we've got Tempest, who I think is one of the more interesting characters. She's one of the older girls, and she's starting to question her belief in Saul. And we find out the reason for that, because as Mother is guiding them in some meditative practices, I'm guessing this is what happened. She heard 2 heartbeats, and she pulled Tempest aside. It's funny that they don't say that, but you're able to draw the conclusion yourself, because she says, Tempest, can you join me in the other room for a moment? And she says, you don't have to do any more work. We're going to take care of you because, this is very important. And Tempest, without even blinking an eye, just gives a very brief indication of the backstory of how this child came to be. One of the clerics remained awake while they were in stasis for 13 years and apparently had his way with some of the young girls. And he was actually going to be executed as soon as they arrived. But of course, the landing never took place. And she kind of says, like, you probably took care of the execution for me, but I would have liked to have seen him, get his justice. So I think in the space of maybe 2 minutes, that whole backstory plays out with Tempest. And obviously this child is going to be very important, not just to Mother, but it's also informing why Tempest is the doubter in the group. And each of the kids kind of has their different thing.
Right. And it'll be interesting to see how the kids play a role once the parents realize that they're on opposite sides. I mean, obviously they know to a certain extent, but, as we said, once Caleb, actually, I think he's going by Marcus, right? That's the character whose identity that he's taken. At this point.
So Caleb and Sue were their atheist names,
Yes.
and Marcus and something else, or maybe Sue is her name. I
don't
don't know. But yeah, there's different names involved. But yeah, I'm sorry, Marcus is the correct name that they know him by.
Well, right, but again, I just think it's obvious that at some point he's got to let mother and father know I'm on your side, and
Or it's just going to be one of those things that how long can he get away with it in the camp of the Mithraics? Right. Because, there's a leadership battle that's going on. I don't want to speak too much of it because I think it's mostly in episode 3, but yeah, the how long can he get away with it, and will he need it to, like you said, negotiate? But there's some new dangers that come up about because just as Tempest is getting settled in her new digs, some sort of beast attacks, and Mother needs her eyes. Well, she worked out something with Father, but Campion is like, I can't trust maybe either of them, And although he has apologized for not trusting Father in the past, Campion has taken her eyes, and it almost is a very close call, right? Because, she did need those eyes to take out these beasts, and Father was able to talk her down, and she put the old ones back in. Completely trustworthy and an appropriate response. Did you get that sense as well, even though Campion maybe had, what he thought was the correct choice there?
Oh, I did. And I also wasn't exactly sure that it was Campion that took the eyes once she went back for them, to fight this new monster, which would have certainly, set up a whole other line of storytelling. But right now, we've talked about a lot of questions that have come up. Certainly, as you said earlier, who are the good guys in this whole story? But how all of this is going to unfold in terms of a structural hierarchy. Are the two sides going to have to come to some sort of an understanding? Are we going to have some sort of a leadership council where, mother or father, hopefully father, sits on the council with the Mithraics? What's going to be the role of religion? Is mother going to be able to deal with that? I'm guessing no.
No, she does not want religion to enter. But, Hunter is one of the believers among the group. I believe Holly, one of the other girls, believes. And then young Vita, she could be pushed either way, even though Tempest is the only doubter currently. They could have their eyes opened. Hunter thinks that it'll be the other way around, that Campion will have his eyes opened to the truth of the Mithraics. We'll see what happens. But, there's still in that background. Is Campion the chosen one? Because he seems to be immune from the sickness that takes out his siblings. And he seems poised to lead the children to their own life away from their parents and their earth baggage that they come to this new planet with. But wouldn't that mean that there's something to the Mithraic religion if this prophecy ends up being true? I almost wish that it ends up being a little bit of each, that the prophecy just ends up being true by default, but it's not the mysteries that they were hoping he would lead them to. And he just ends up being a leader on this new planet. That's what I'm hoping for.
Makes me feel like Battlestar Galactica all over. That are they going to head back to Earth? I forget what it was called in Battlestar Galactica now, but
right, because once you take away all the modern conveniences, set aside the fact that you're living with an android, you have a very simple life, an agricultural life, and of course you're going to go back to some of those primitive instincts and come up with your own explanations for things, even if you've got a scientist, mother and father, who are trying to teach you the ways of physics and biology and all that. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see, because obviously there's multiple levels of influence. It could be Campion with the kids. It could be Caleb and Sue, or Marcus and Sue with the Mithraics, whether they'll have an influence on them or whether the Mithraics will have an influence on, the atheists in hiding, as it were, because they've taken to parenthood quite well. Maybe they will, want to get Paul back into the fold and then move on from there. But I have the feeling that the seeds of doubt are going to be laid into the rigid social structure that the Mithraics have built by virtue of Marcus being there. So, we'll see how that plays out. But the other thing that is, I think, the main question that episode 2 poses is, were those creatures? Or were they perhaps sentient inhabitants? Did they have anything to do with those holes? Because they pushed Marcus down into the hole. Thankfully, he was, tied in. But, are there multiple levels of biology going on here? And might some of them actually be sentient? Because it could be that Mother will feel some consequences to killing those 2 scouts, as it were, if these are actual, sentient beings rather than just wild creatures.
Well, there certainly are a lot of bones lying around that Mother and Father don't seem all that concerned about. And we don't get the idea that they've got, a lot of research about Kepler 22b, other than that from an environmental standpoint, it's habitable, or at least as habitable as anything around. So yeah, what are these creatures? The other thing that I just wanted to mention just briefly, the hole into which their ship falls seems to be this central focal point for a lot of the action in the first couple episodes. So, their ship falls down even further into the hole. Is that it? Will we see it again? Will somebody else descend into the hole for whatever reason?
Yeah, I guess I felt like sort of that was so that it could set up that they needed to steal the lander from the Mithraics and some of the other discoveries that are made there. But yeah, that did seem like there might be more to it. But did they still have everything they needed for the initial colony, or were there things in that ship that they were supposed to, use that they didn't have access to? None of that has really played out. So I'm not entirely sure. The one thing that I think the Bones proposed was that I think there was something about the bones had to be planted underneath those tubers in order for them to grow. There was a little bit of that. There was an additional wolf imagery when Mother goes kind of crazy and she digs up the bones like a dog, right? And then the other thing that I'm questioning about the creatures is, why didn't they show up until now? And I think there is some questioning of that happens in episode 3 as well, but they haven't shown their faces at all until this new colony was established with the Mithraic kids. So why didn't they attack the camp during the 12, 13 years that Mother and Father and the original set of 5 kids were there? And I think that will actually also amplify some of Campion's doubts about his parents and why this happened.
Maybe for the same reason that Mother and Father haven't moved to the equator in a more temperate climate at this point.
Exactly. They're talking about doing it, but something was preventing that. I think this is all going to play into there's some sort of civilization on this planet. This is just my own personal prediction. I have no foreknowledge, so no spoilers. But I'm just thinking that might be how it plays out, and that would be exciting if that were the case. So I'm all for that. But are they going to migrate? Is there going to be a migration? I don't really know, but I think basically the reason we stopped after the first 2 episodes, not the least of which is that's been our pattern for the Sci-Fi Fidelity podcast, is that this was the setup. Episodes 1 and 2, we couldn't talk about episode 1 by itself without leaving too much out, but episodes 1 and 2 really create a nice little setup, and now we can get into the meat of the story. And so in that sense, I think it's a successful pilot +1, whereas that's a stumbling block for a lot of series.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. And, again, it's an age in which if your pilot doesn't immediately grab the viewer, you're dead in the water. And I've heard the excuse, well, you have to let things unfold. You got to give it a chance. No, I don't, because I'm just going to move on to the next show. So there's no reason a pilot can't be entirely captivating and do all of those things in 45 minutes or so. Because, in the age of Netflix and other streaming services, now we have episodes that are routinely 55, 60, 65 minutes. It almost feels like cheating in terms of putting together a pilot that does those things. But Not so here. I mean, this was a normal length episode.
I think that either episode 2 or 3 was actually shorter than usual. I think it was 38 to 41 minutes, something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can definitely play around with the format a bit. And I think that's going to be a beneficial thing for this show having been on HBO Max versus TNT as it was originally intended. So again, I always like to give a series 3 episodes before I judge it. And I have seen the first 3 episodes. I'm going to be sticking with it. Whether you guys stick with it is up to you, and whether you want us to come back and discuss the finale, because we have a lot of stuff to watch, Dave and I. So, we won't necessarily continue with this, at least not right at first. I, plan on watching it regardless at some point. But if you want us to keep pace with it and come back for the finale when it airs, however many 6 weeks from now or 5 weeks from now, whatever it is, let us know in the comments below, and we'll be back with another discussion of Raised by Wolves. But in the meantime, Dave, I hope our viewers out there are enjoying Raised by Wolves on HBO Max. And thanks for listening to this discussion.
And give us a thumbs up if you like this discussion.
That's exactly right. And don't forget to subscribe to Den of Geek for more video content, not just show discussions, but interviews and other things that all geeks enjoy. Thanks again for joining us.
See you next time.